There's a quiet moment that happens after months, maybe years, of walking on eggshells, overthinking every conversation, and carrying a heavy sense of confusion that never quite lifts. You have spent so much time trying to figure out what went wrong, what you did to cause it, and how to fix it. You replayed arguments in your head. You searched for the right words to make them understand. You gave your energy, your patience, and your trust, and still, nothing felt stable. Then, without a dramatic announcement, something shifts inside you. The fog begins to clear. You stop blaming yourself. You start seeing the patterns for what they actually are. It is not a loud realization. It is a quiet settling of truth. And when that happens, something changes in the dynamic. You will notice it in the small ways they interact with you, in the sudden shifts in tone, in the unspoken tension that replaces the usual rhythm. They sense it before you ever say a word. Narcissists do not rely on spoken declarations to know you have figured them out. They rely on the subtle collapse of the system they built around you. The moment you stop feeding it, they feel the ground shift. You were never the problem. The exhaustion you carry is not a sign of your failure. It is the natural result of being placed in an emotional environment that required you to constantly adapt, justify, and shrink yourself to keep the peace. Relationships built on manipulation do not run on mutual respect or honest communication. They run on control, uncertainty, and an uneven distribution of emotional responsibility. One person is expected to manage the reactions, absorb the blame, and maintain the illusion of harmony, while the other person remains untouchable, unaccountable, and always right. That imbalance is not an accident. It is the foundation of how the dynamic operates. When you finally see it, you are not being negative or cynical. You are simply aligning with reality. And reality has a way of disrupting systems that depend on confusion to survive. The psychological reason they notice your shift so quickly is rooted in how control functions in these dynamics. Control is not maintained through constant confrontation. It is maintained through predictability. The system works because you respond in expected ways. You try to explain yourself. You apologize to restore calm. You hope they will finally meet you halfway. You adjust your behavior to avoid triggering their defensiveness. That pattern becomes a reliable source of emotional regulation for them. It confirms that the dynamic is still functioning. When you stop playing your assigned role, the feedback loop breaks. They no longer get the response they depend on. That loss of predictability registers immediately. It does not always look dramatic. It often looks like subtle testing. They might bring up an old argument, just to see if you will defend yourself. They might make a passive comment to check if you will still seek their approval. They might suddenly act unusually kind, not because they have changed, but because they are measuring your compliance. This is not about them wanting to connect. It is about them verifying whether the control structure is still intact. When you recognize these moments, it can feel unsettling at first. You might wonder if you are overreacting or misreading their behavior. But the pattern is consistent because the psychology behind it is consistent. People who rely on manipulation do not operate from a place of secure attachment or mutual vulnerability. They operate from a place of emotional dependency, disguised as strength. Their sense of stability is tied to how much influence they have over your emotional state. When you begin to withdraw that influence, even silently, they experience it as a threat. That threat does not always show up as anger. Sometimes it shows up as sudden withdrawal. Sometimes it shows up as exaggerated generosity. Sometimes it shows up as subtle criticism, designed to pull you back into self-doubt. The form changes, but the purpose remains the same. They are trying to restore the familiar rhythm. They are trying to regain the emotional leverage that kept the system running. And the reason it feels so disorienting is because your nervous system has been trained to respond to those cues. You were conditioned to prioritize their comfort over your own clarity. Unlearning that takes time, but noticing it is the first step toward breaking it. Your internal shift does not require a confrontation to be real. It does not require you to announce your awareness or defend your perspective. The change happens in the space between your thoughts and your reactions. You stop reaching for explanations that do not exist. You stop trying to prove your worth to someone who benefits from your uncertainty. You start trusting your own perception again. This is where the psychology of cognitive dissonance begins to resolve. For a long time, you held two conflicting realities at once. You knew something felt wrong, but you were also told you were too sensitive, too dramatic, or misunderstanding their intentions. Your mind tried to bridge that gap by blaming yourself. That self-blame is not a personal flaw. It is a natural response to prolonged emotional inconsistency. When someone repeatedly denies your reality while demanding your compliance, your brain looks for the easiest way to reduce the tension. Blaming yourself is less terrifying than accepting that the person you trusted is unwilling to share accountability. But once you step out of that loop, the tension lifts. You stop forcing yourself to make sense of nonsense. You stop trying to fit your truth into their narrative. And that quiet refusal to play the old game is exactly what signals the shift. They notice it because your energy changes. You speak differently. You pause longer before responding. You no longer chase closure or demand fairness from someone who benefits from the lack of both. Your boundaries become quieter, but firmer. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to earn respect through compliance. You simply begin to act in alignment with your own standards. That alignment is visible. It does not require words. It shows up in the way you no longer jump when their mood shifts. It shows up in the way you no longer internalize their deflections. It shows up in the way you finally allow yourself to see the situation without filtering it through their perspective. When that happens, the dynamic loses its momentum. They can no longer rely on your emotional investment to sustain the illusion. And without that investment, the facade has nothing to anchor itself to. This is where many people make the mistake of expecting a conversation that never comes. You might wait for them to acknowledge what has changed. You might hope for an apology that validates your experience. You might keep looking for a moment where they finally take responsibility. But the psychology of this dynamic does not support that outcome. Accountability requires a willingness to face discomfort, and the entire system was built to avoid it. When they sense you have figured them out, they do not suddenly become reflective. They become strategic. They will either escalate their efforts to regain control or distance themselves to protect the image they need to maintain. Both responses come from the same place. Neither response is about you. Both are about preserving a structure that depends on your participation. Recognizing this is not about cynicism. It is about clarity. Clarity allows you to stop investing your energy in outcomes that are structurally impossible. The effect this has on you, once you truly see it, is profound but quiet. You stop feeling responsible for their emotional state. You stop carrying the weight of their defensiveness. You stop measuring your worth by their willingness to engage. Your nervous system begins to settle. The constant alertness that kept you scanning for danger slowly fades. You start sleeping better. You start thinking more clearly. You start making decisions based on your own values instead of your fear of their reaction. This is not detachment born from bitterness. It is detachment born from understanding. You finally see that you were never competing for their love. You were navigating a system designed to keep you unsure. And once the uncertainty dissolves, the need to prove yourself dissolves with it. There will be moments when the old patterns try to resurface. They might reach out when you have been quiet for too long. They might frame their return as concern or nostalgia or sudden realization. But the underlying mechanism remains the same. They are checking the stability of the old dynamic. They are testing whether your clarity is permanent or temporary. This is not a reason to panic. It is a reason to stay grounded. You do not need to respond with anger or prove a point. You only need to maintain the boundary you have already established. You can acknowledge their message without reopening the door. You can respond politely without re-engaging emotionally. You can let their actions speak for themselves, without translating them into evidence that you were wrong. This is where calm detachment becomes your strongest tool. It is not about ignoring reality. It is about refusing to be pulled back into it. Boundaries are not about controlling their behavior. They are about controlling your own. You cannot force someone to be honest. You cannot force someone to respect you. You can only decide what you will no longer tolerate, and then act accordingly. That means stepping away from conversations that loop into deflection. That means refusing to justify your perspective to someone who has already made up their mind. That means protecting your peace instead of sacrificing it for the illusion of harmony. Boundaries are not punishment. They are self-respect in practice. And self-respect does not require an audience. It only requires consistency. When you apply it steadily, the dynamic loses its grip. You stop feeding the cycle. You stop waiting for permission to move forward. You simply begin to live in alignment with your own truth. This is where the healing process truly begins. It does not start with their apology. It does not start with their acknowledgement. It starts with your decision to stop letting their behavior dictate your emotional state. You begin to rebuild trust in your own judgment. You allow yourself to feel the grief of what you hoped for, without letting that grief trap you in the past. You acknowledge the time you spent trying to fix something that was never yours to carry. You forgive yourself for staying too long. You recognize that survival is not the same as complicity. You stayed because you were trying to make a broken system work. That does not make you weak. It makes you human. And now, you get to redirect that humanity toward your own well-being. The path forward is not about becoming hardened. It is about becoming clear. Clarity does not mean you never feel sadness. It means you no longer confuse sadness with responsibility. It means you can look back at the relationship without rewriting the facts to make yourself feel safer. It means you can acknowledge the manipulation without letting it define your future. Healing is not about erasing the past. It is about integrating it. You take what you learned, you honor your resilience, and you move forward with a quieter, steadier sense of self. You no longer need to prove that you were right. You simply know that you were real. And that is enough. You will notice that as you continue to step into your own clarity, the need to analyze their behavior fades. You stop spending energy trying to decode their motives. You stop searching for hidden meanings in their words. You stop wondering if they will ever change. That mental space becomes available for your own life. You start investing in relationships that do not require you to shrink yourself. You start setting standards that reflect your actual worth. You start speaking with a calm confidence that comes from experience, not from performance. This is not about becoming someone new. It is about returning to the person you were before the confusion took over. The person who trusts their own perception. The person who knows their own boundaries. The person who does not need external validation to feel grounded. There will be days when the memory of the exhaustion still surfaces. That is normal. Healing is not a straight line. It is a gradual recalibration. Some days you will feel completely at peace. Other days you will feel a quiet heaviness that reminds you of what you walked through. Both are part of the process. Neither means you are failing. They simply mean you are human, and you are adjusting to a reality that no longer demands you betray yourself. You do not need to rush through it. You only need to stay consistent. You protect your energy. You honor your limits. You refuse to return to environments that require you to abandon your own truth. That consistency builds strength. It builds resilience. It builds a life that no longer orbits around someone else's need for control. Closure does not come from their mouth. It comes from your mind. It comes when you stop waiting for them to hand you the final piece of the puzzle and realize you already have the complete picture. You see the manipulation. You see the imbalance. You see the patterns. You see your own role in staying, and you forgive it. You see your own strength in leaving, and you honor it. That internal completion is what allows you to move forward without dragging the past behind you. You do not need their permission to heal. You do not need their acknowledgement to be free. You only need your own commitment to your well-being. As you step into this next chapter, you will carry a quieter confidence. You will speak with less urgency because you no longer need to convince anyone of your reality. You will listen more carefully because you know the difference between genuine connection and emotional strategy. You will choose peace over proof, clarity over chaos, and self-respect over survival. The relationship that once consumed your thoughts will gradually become a lesson instead of a life sentence. You will look back not with bitterness, but with understanding. You will recognize that the moment you figured them out was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of your freedom. You do not need to announce your clarity. You do not need to defend your boundaries. You do not need to wait for them to catch up to the truth. You only need to continue living in alignment with what you now know. Keep your pace steady. Keep your expectations realistic. Keep your focus on your own growth. The manipulation thrived in the space of your confusion. It dissolves in the space of your awareness. And once that awareness becomes your foundation, you will find that peace is not something you have to chase. It is something you finally allow yourself to keep. You have already done the hardest part. You saw through the illusion. You reclaimed your perception. You stepped out of the cycle. Now, you get to build a life that reflects the truth you finally trust. And that life is waiting for you. Clear, calm, and entirely your own.